Good day! We are Group 4, composed of Jerisa Cyril Cortez, together with Kiara Manuel, Leia Payas, and Joseph Corpus. Today, we will be discussing the documentary Kapalit ng Katahimikan by Cara David, which explores the disturbing reality of sexual abuse cases in South UPI, Maguindanao. The video highlights how victims are often silenced through traditional tribal settlements that prioritizes peace over justice. These practices raises serious ethical concerns, particularly when cultural traditions begin to conflict with protection of basic human rights. Our presentation will analyze these ethical issues and their effects on the victims.
We're now going to tackle the analysis of ethical issues and dilemmas. Cara David, the reporter, made some ethical decision when it comes to issues relating to children's direct interviews. Instead of interviewing the two children, Marisol and Jasmine, who were victims of sexual abuse, to recounted the experience. The reporter read sworn statements from both children because she knew how difficult it would be for them to recall the traumatic event personally. This, therefore, means that the children were never made to talk about the abuse themselves. The reporter instead opted to read their sworn statements. The practice is clear ethical consideration aimed to protecting vulnerable subjects from possible re-traumatization by making them verbalize the abuse incident for the documentary. Though of course, interviewing is not only decision with respect to which such traumatic stories would generally be likely to be harder ethical theory. Other consideration also apply, such as as a reporting on children, or for instance, Marisol, who was 10 during that time, and Jasmine, who was just 5 years old, as well as the mysterious adult Dolores. The reporter has accepted the difficulties and weight of documenting these stories, especially as a mother and more as a woman, which openly shows how this act would affect her personally and which kind of sensitivity it would require. Thus, although it is not framed in the transcript of dilemma as a dilemma, the carefulness of the act suggests that there is an awareness of the fact that one must balance against truth, minimization of harm to the victim.
Now let us move on to the ethical considerations upheld in the documentary. Cara David's work serves as a strong example of ethical journalism. First, it upholds the privacy and protection of vulnerable individuals, especially minors, by not showing their faces or interviewing them directly. Instead, Cara respectfully reads their sworn statements to preserve their emotional safety. Second, the documentary demonstrates a commitment to factual accuracy, citing credible sources such as the Philippine National Police 2023 and the World Health Organization 2024 to support the victims' accounts. Third, it handles cultural issues with sensitivity, addressing flaws in tribal customs such as forced marriage and monetary settlements, while encouraging reforms without disrespecting indigenous traditions. Lastly, Kara's emotional honesty, which adds a layer of sincerity to the film. By openly sharing how difficult this documentary was to produce, she invites the audience to understand the gravity of the issue on a deeper and more personal level. The documentary illustrates how journalism can uncover the truth while still protecting, respecting, and empowering those affected.
The reporting of Cara David's documentary, Kapalit ng Katahimikan, mostly complies with journalistic ethics, particularly when it comes to sensitive subjects like sexual abuse in indigenous tribes. However, because of the intricate relationship between cultural tradition and quest of justice, there are some ethical consideration that was not observed in the documentary. The first two is the inadequate systemic solution investigation and human rights advocacy. In the situation seen in the documentary, tribal councils use customary methods to settle complaints of sexual assault, like providing financial compensation or setting up marriages between the victims and the abusers. Despite being a component of the community's cultural norms, these activities go against both victims' right to injustice and fundamental human rights principles. According to the study of Sarah Deer 2004, it is evident that Native women cannot rely on outside legal systems to address the high prevalence of sexual violence they encounter by ensuring justice and accountability. In addition, a less critical analysis of this custom may have resulted from the desire to honor and depict indigenous cultural practices, which may have minimized their detrimental consequence on the victims' rights and welfare of the victims. Furthermore, the documentary shows cases in which victims are compensated. For instance, 6,000 pesos and a horse rather than taking the offenders to court. Despite being real, these depictions don't critically examine how these remedies could continue injustice and quiet victims. The documentary can intentionally legitimate these cultural practices by failing to critically examine them, which could deter victims from pursuing formal legal action and prolong the cycle of abuse and silence. The documentary did a good job in highlighting the problems. However, it does not go into detail on possible systemic changes or preventive actions that could address the underlying causes. Perhaps because of the time limits or intricacy of the issues, the main emphasis seems to be on increasing awareness rather than providing a solution. Next, two is the possible prejudice and inobjectivity. Although noticeable in the documentary's emotive tone and emphasis on human stories, it runs the risk of introducing prejudice and compromising the reporting's neutrality. Strong reactions are inevitably elicited by the emotionally charged subject matter, and this might affect the journalist's viewpoint and delivery. In addition with this, Cara David's narration contains emotional responses and personal observation that could compromise the objectivity required of professional reporting. A thorough grasp of the problem may be limited by emotional framing, which could influence audiences to embrace a specific point of view without understanding the larger context or opposing viewpoints. According to the study of Daniel 2021, neutrality is an essential weapon for journalists who seek the truth. Your position and the reputation of your organization will be at risk if you lie about something when your audience expect you to be truthful. In conclusion, insufficient investigation of structural institutional remedies prevented Kapalit ng Katahimikan from optimizing its impact at the grassroots and policy level. It was successful in raising awareness, but it failed as a tactical instrument for long-term change, underscoring the significance of combining compelling narrative with practical wisdom.
In conclusion, Cara David's documentary Kapalit ng Katahimikan or In Exchange for Silence sheds light on the harrowing experiences of social abuse victims in Maguindanao, Philippines. While cultural practices such as tribal settlements often silence the victims and deny them justice. These situations are deeply unethical as accepting compensation or forcing victims to marry their abusers violates basic human rights and perpetuates a dangerous cycle of abuse. Such practices place community reputation above individual dignity, undermining justice and the well-being of survivors. At the heart of these issues lies a difficult ethical dilemma: the conflict between preserving cultural traditions and upholding universal human rights. While culture deserves a respect, it should never come the cost of a person's safety, freedom, and healing. The documentary challenges us to reflect on the moral cost of silence and urges society to protect the vulnerable, empower the voiceless, and ensure that justice is not sacrificed for the sake of tradition. As author Desmond Tutu once said, if you are neutral in situation of injustice, you have chosen the side of oppressor.
Moving on, listed here are the reference that was used in the analysis, the task distribution. And that's all. Thank you for listening.